All right, here we go. Here's the question. Are you a Zionist? What is a Zionist, she asked. That's a great question. Well, the first answer is there is a secular, contemporary, geopolitical description. Zionism is a movement for originally the reestablishment and now the development and protection of a Jewish nation in what is now Israel. It was established as a political organization in 1897 under Theodore Herzl and later led by Chaim Weizmann. And indeed, if you say a Zionist, you are talking about someone who believes in the modern state of Israel, who affirms that yes, they should be a nation. There are a number of Zionists that are very secular, and they just think that the Jews have been pushed around for so long that they needed a homeland so that they wouldn't be persecuted. There are a number of people, a number of Jewish people and a number of Christians that believe that in order for God to continue to move through history and bring history to its conclusion, that there needs to be a state of Israel, and it figures into Old Testament and New Testament prophecy. And so that would be a Zionist, a person who is in favor of the modern state of Israel. Yeah.
Last week, you just watched the movie titled Golda. It was about the 70s war, the Yom Kippur War, with her as prime minister. It went through the whole scenario of all the tension sequences, strategies, peacemaking for Israel and Egypt, and that whole thing. Very interesting movie. Golda Meir.
Right. And so this is a very prominent kind of idea in our society today. However, there is a scriptural, theological, poetic description of a Zionist, and we find that in Psalm 125, beginning there at verse number 1. Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion. Now, a simile in Hebrew poetry is the use of like or as. And so those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion. It is comparing those believers with Mount Zion. Now, what's Mount Zion? Mount Zion is the Dome of the Rock that we see prominent in Jerusalem today. Now, right now, there's a mosque on it, but that was the Temple Mount for the first and second temple. And of course, Jews say that that's going to be the Temple Mount for the third temple. How they're going to get rid of the mosque, I don't know. But they say they're going to rebuild the temple and reinstitute the sacrificial system. They're going to kill the red heifer and purify everything. And that is a very common idea in at least a lot of Christians' eschatology. Well, the important thing is that we recognize that the psalmist is saying, if you are a believer, you're a Zionist. And that's the tack I want us to take today. The main emphasis of the theology of this psalm concerns the security of believers, especially believers in trying times, and the insecurity of make-believers who will be exposed during those difficult times. So Psalm 124, remember last week, we talked about Psalm 124, and it was about deliverance. It was about rescue from danger. And Psalm 125 is about perseverance, First, it talks about perseverance positively, in other words, for those believers, and negatively, it talks about the bad situation that non-believers are in. And so this is really a wonderful psalm, especially when we talk about the Psalms of Ascent that continue to move up towards Jerusalem. And as the Levites took another step up on the steps going from the court of the women to the court of the Israelites, as they sang these 15 Psalms. And so Psalm 125, the sixth of these Psalms, is a psalm about perseverance, about holding on. Gene Peterson says about Psalm 125, he says, here's what he would say: relax, we're secure, God's running the show. And that's really what this is all about, isn't it? That's what this psalm is about. So I'm saying the Lord provides security for his people both now and forever. He did it in the past for these people that came to worship at the temple. He's doing it now for you and me. And so if he did it in the past and he's doing it now, he's going to continue doing it when? Forever. That's one of the key words that you find in this psalm. If you find forever, circle it, underline it, highlight it, because it is important. Because whenever you get to the New Testament and the Apostle Paul takes over this idea, we're talking about the security of the believer forever. We're talking about eternal security here. One of the first mentions of a foreverness kind of doctrine. And so let's jump into this psalm itself and look first of all at verse number 1, the stability of a Zionist. Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. Now, we know that the believer is as or like Mount Zion. And if you stop and think about what is being said here, is that Mount Zion is a bedrock. It is a stability in a earthquake-prone area. And by the way, Israel is an earthquake-prone area. It's close to what is geologically known as the Triple Junction. It is one of the most seismically active areas in all the world, because it has 3 plates coming together and butting up against each other, some going above, some going under, and all of that time there's a lot of shaking going on. And here's the whole deal: Mount Zion is bedrock, and so it is secure. It is not going to open up and everybody be sucked into a pit. It is not going to be blasted apart. It's going to be there. And so Christians today are like Mount Zion. Christians today are like the rock. Christians today are like Jesus. This is definitely very important. Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. That's what forever means. Forever. For all time. For all time. And so there's the stability of the Zionist. When an event, when even the weakest saint exercises the simplest faith in God, he becomes anchored to an immovable mountain of stability, who is the Lord himself. The emphasis of Psalm 125 is not on the precariousness of the Christian life, but on its solidity. Living as a Christian is not walking a tightrope without a safety net above a breathless crowd, many of whom would like nothing better than the morbid thrill of seeing us fall. It's setting secure in a fortress. We're on the rock. We're on the rock. We're like the rock. One commentator said some persons are like sand, ever shifting and treacherous. Some are like the sea, restless and unsettled. Some are like the wind, uncertain and inconstant. But believers are like a mountain, strong, stable, secure. That's us. That's us. The psalmist stands on Mount Zion in the city of God, looking upward to God. He believes that his faith makes him, spiritually speaking, as strong as the rock-solid mountain on which he has planted his feet. Now, let's pretend we were in Jerusalem. And here we are on Mount Zion. Forget the mosque and all of that stuff. Let's just say we know we're on Mount Zion. We know we're on the rock. And we see the symbolism there. But as you look around, as you look at the horizon, all around Jerusalem are mountains that are higher. Actually, Jerusalem kind of sits in a saucer or a bowl. And Mount Zion sticks up a little bit above that saucer. But around it are all of these high mountains, Mount of Olives and so forth. And that's what verse number 2 is talking about there. Not just talking about the stability of the Zionist, but talking about literally the security of the Zionists. Look what it says in verse 2. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth, and when? Forever. Forever. That word forever is a key word here. This talks about eternity. This talks about forever security. So, for the scepter of the wickedness shall not rest on the land of the righteous, so that the righteous will not pull forth their hands to do wrong. There was a minister that was visiting an elderly man who had been a Christian most of his life, and the pastor said, "Sir, you've been keeping the faith for lots and lots of years, for so long. You must feel pretty confident that you're going to hold out to the end." And the guy looked at his pastor and said, "It's really not a matter of me holding out. It's the fact that the Lord is holding on to me. The Bible assures me that I can trust him for that. You may quake upon the rock, but the rock is there for your safety. You may wonder how in the world this is all going to come about, but the Lord is surrounding you. The Lord is surrounding us. The Lord is surrounding this little group here and those folks that are at home. The Lord has his arms around us." And it's really interesting there. Remember back in the times of Elisha? You know, Ben-Hadad was the king of Syria, and he'd been fighting the king of Israel. But every time he made plans to attack Israel, Elisha told the king, and somehow the people of Israel escaped. And so Elisha told the king of Israel, the Jewish armies escaped. Ben-Hadad thought there was a traitor among his officers, and someone told him the truth, and he decided he was going to capture Elisha. So Elisha was at Dothan with a young man who was his servant. Ben-Hadad marched his armies to Dothan and placed them around the city. At daybreak, the young man went out to draw water and came back, and he said, "Master, we're surrounded. They're going to get us." And Elisha says, "Nah, that's no problem at all." And he says, "Oh yeah, they're all around us. They're all around us." And so Elisha I can imagine Elisha he must not have been a real patient man. He learned that from Elijah. And so I can imagine he just, Lord, you got to help us here. This guy has to see what's going on. And the Lord revealed to them around the Assyrian army, there were armies, there were legions upon legions of angels and chariots of angels ready to attack the Syrians. Can't you just imagine this young man? Wow. You know, that's the way it is with us. We may think that we're in a lot of trouble, but we're surrounded by the angels of God. We're surrounded by God himself as Holy Spirit. The Spirit is within us. He's under us and over us and around us. Who do we have to fear? Who do we have to fear? How wonderful it is. All the horses, all the chariots of fire, all around Elisha, they were protecting these men. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. That's what Psalm 27 says. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Well, that's the stability. That's the security. And now look at the sufficiency of the Zionist. The Zionist is in trouble because the last part of verse 3, or the verse 3 talks about the fact that there is a scepter across the land. Most people seem to think that this was during the time of the Babylonian captivity, when they came in and they literally sacked the land, and they were under foreign oppression. And so even with that, the psalmist is saying we're surrounded by God. We're not in near the trouble we think we are. And so whenever the Israelites realized this, they said, "Do good, O Lord, to those who are good and to those who are upright in their hearts. But as for those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead them away with the doers of iniquity." There's a sufficiency for the Zionists. You see, we're secure, we're surrounded, but also we have everything we need because God is the one that is in charge. Now, I think that these verses are saying to you and to me, even though we have all of these things, even though we know that God is taking care of us, it doesn't do away with our need to go to the Lord and express our dependence on him in prayer. We need to be involved in praying. Promises of God were not meant to eliminate the need for prayer. Rather, they were intended to teach us what we ought to pray for. Thus, the promise of verses 1 through 3 are now followed by a prayer. Verses 4 and 5, though confident in the Lord's protection, the people are to pray for his help. What a beautiful combination. Confidence in the Lord's protection and urgency in prayer. Because we are confident of the Lord's protection, it ought to cause us not to be in panic in prayer, but it ought to cause us to be intent in prayer. It ought to cause us to redouble our time to pray and redouble our confidence that the Lord is taking care of us. And we ought to tell him about it. It's a beautiful combination, confidence and urgency, that we have in our lives today. We are eternally secure in Jesus Christ. And so being secure, being in this secure place and seeing what's happening in the world, seeing what's happening in our neighbors' houses, seeing what's happening across the street ought to cause us to be very urgent in our prayer for the conditions that we find the world in right now. So, isn't this interesting? There is the serenity of the Zionist. Look what it says at the end of verse 5. Peace be upon Israel. Peace be upon Israel. That's serenity. Even in the midst of chaos and trouble and all kinds of things, there ought to be a peace that passes all understanding. I have this little book, and at one time I was collecting these books by Thomas Cahill, and probably my favorite of those books, How the Irish Saved Civilization, the untold story of Ireland's heroic help from the fall of Rome to the rise of medieval Europe, hinges of history. Well, in this book, he tells about St. Patrick. And I have a sermon somewhere. Was St. Patrick a Baptist? Well, I think he was, because of his evangelistic zeal. When he was 16 years old, his family lived in the Roman Empire that was decaying and falling apart. And he was a Roman. And he was kidnapped, and literally he was taken to Ireland, and he was sold as a slave to a rich landowner. He stayed there 6 years as a slave, and he finally escaped, made it back to his home, made it back to his parents' estate and so forth, and felt that God was asking him to go back to Ireland because he had been saved as a slave. And God was saying, I want you to go back to Ireland, and I want you to evangelize that country. Of the great evangelists of our day, Patrick is right up there with Billy Graham, with Dwight L. Moody, and the others that have had great impact on our world. And he started, if I remember right, somewhere around 800 churches himself. Unbelievable kind of thing. And the whole time he was there, he's a Roman. Literally, he's an escaped slave. And they could have captured him and put him back in slavery again. But he went there knowing the danger that he was in. And there is a prayer that's known as St. Patrick's breastplate. And it is a prayer that you can pray and I can pray because it talks about the confidence that we have in God. And here's how it goes. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to protect me, God's host to save me from the snares of devils, from temptations of vices, from everyone who shall wish me ill, Christ to shield me today against poison, against burning, against drowning, against wounding, so there may cause to be abundance of reward. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lay down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise. I arise today through a mighty strength. That's the kind of God we have. A God who gives us a serenity that in the midst of trouble, in the midst of trial, he's going to take care of us. Always, no matter what. I'm reminded of a really simple little story. My daddy was chasing his little girl around the house, and he swooped down and grabbed her, picked her up, threw her up in the air and grabbed her. And he said, I got you now. And she threw her arms around her daddy's neck, And she said, Daddy, I have all of you. I have all of you. You know who you are? You're that little girl. And the Father is your Father in heaven. Oh, he's got you. Throw your arms around him. Said, I have all of you, Lord. You have all of me. I have all of you. I have all of you. Some of us, safe in the arms of God, forget to squeeze back. Would you join me? Safe in the arms of God, and pray that prayer. Pray with me, will you? Lord, you have me. You have all of me. And Lord, in a sense, I just throw my arms around you. Say, Lord, I want all of you, all the days of my life. Amen. Thank you.
Thanks, Pastor.
Very came up with it.